Hi, everyone. This is Raquel.
Hi, and this is Jennifer.
Welcome to Madness Cafe.
This is a feminist podcast where we talk about women's issues, politics, and health and wellness.
And where those issues intersect. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Madness Cafe. Today, Jennifer and I are going to talk about women and alcohol. And this is something that I've been interested in quite a bit, especially since the pandemic started back in March of 2020. I don't know about y'all, but I was, for some reason, really concerned about whether or not liquor stores were going to be considered essential at that time, because I don't know about the rest of y'all, but I was pretty anxious during that whole time. And, hate to say it, but wine played a little part in my coping skills at the time. And it turns out I wasn't alone in that. Apparently, according to a study in the Journal of American Medical Association Network Open in 2020, it found that the days in which women drank excessively, which is defined as 4 or more drinks in a few hours, increased by 41% in lockdown.
Oh.
Another report from RTI International for the National Institute on Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism said that mothers with children under 5 increased their drinking by more than 300% during pandemic. If you found yourself drinking a little more than normal, or maybe if you're still doing that, you are not alone. You are in, well, for lack of a better phrase, good company. One thing that kept popping into my head with all of this is that men and women metabolize alcohol differently. And so our bodies react to it differently. A man and a woman of the same weight, and they drink the same amount of alcohol. It takes a woman longer to metabolize it than it does a man. And so a woman will have greater effects of the alcohol than the man will. So the woman basically gets drunker faster than her male counterpart.
I think we learned that in high school.
Yep.
Just saying.
Yep. Yeah, and then relearned it in college.
Right.
And then after college, law school. Yeah. Yesterday. No, I'm just kidding. So research backs all that up, that women and men are affected differently by alcohol, and that the pandemic really has not helped any of us as far as all that goes. Based on all of that, we have a guest with us today. Her name is Monica Tan, who has a very relevant story when it comes to women and alcohol. So Monica, thank you so much for being on the show. Here we go. Let's get started with Monica's story and why Monica's joining us today.
Welcome, Monica.
Thank you so much for inviting me to join you today. I am really excited to be here.
Monica, I know that you work in is it called the alcohol industry? Or is there a better word?
Inside, we just call it the industry.
The industry.
Because, it's an insider perspective. I think that Anthony Bourdain kind of made that like lingua franca, but it is the hospitality, I would say, I would call it the hospitality industry, but I focus specifically on wine these days. I've worked in the industry for 22 years now, and I have done just about everything in a restaurant possible. But what I currently do is, for the last 3 years, I've been working in a natural wine bar in Detroit that is woman-owned and led. We focus on small production wines, and we really try to create a very healthy and hospitable hospitality environment. So this is, for me to align with this conversation today is really exciting, because it's something that I think about a lot. And to your earlier comments, the pandemic has really shifted my perspective on both what I do and the purpose of wine and alcohol in general in our lives.
Wow. That's big. How did the pandemic shift your perception?
Oh, wow. Well, I mean, this will take a little bit of backstory, but I'll try and make it fairly concise. I I took over running the business that I work for in 2019. And so I walked in fairly green into the pandemic. I had just relocated to Detroit by myself at the end of a 12-year relationship. And this was in February of 2020. So little did I know that we were going to be walking squarely into probably the biggest life changing moment that, any of us would go through with other human beings, hopefully in our lifetimes. So, what we had to do is we had to reconsider how we ran the business. It has been a really interesting journey to watch people's habits, to engage with them, to see beyond that, like the purpose of what bars do for people that is far beyond the consumption of alcohol, and how to figure out how to reconsider our relationship with bar culture, which has been a big set of my initiatives going into 2022 after 2 years of experiencing what the pandemic has been like for all of us, to try and find some new terrain where we can find room to meet with one another and find community, which is a huge part of what bar culture is, while encouraging it to be sustainable and healthy, which it has not always been.
Right.
I see. Can I read a post of yours that you put on Instagram? Because Raquel and I were talking about this topic, women and alcohol, and then you made this post. And I thought, wow, this is one of the most relevant things I've heard in a while. And we really wanted to talk to you about it. Do you mind if I read it?
Not at all, please share.
Okay. So you said, warning, this is perhaps an overshare, but here we are, so I will proceed. In my work, I am a sommelier. I spend a great deal of time thinking about researching and discussing wine. 6 months ago, I decided not to drink recreationally anymore. This was the result of some soul searching, a desire to focus on healing some long term autoimmune issues, and an increasingly heavy meditation practice. Intoxicants really had no place in my life anymore on a personal level. So I decided to explore drinking again this week, and I find it just is not the path to intentional action and living in a mindful way. It was a strong reminder of the value of sobriety in my life. The fact is that I honestly enjoy my life, both personally and professionally, when I am clear headed and free of the weird feelings created by consuming depressants. These seemingly dissonant spaces can exist in peace with one another. For what it's worth, there are actually a lot of us that reach this place in our career in the industry. So I am posting this for the sake of visibility. I have really benefited from the community of sober and F&B professionals. I'm assuming that's food and beverage professionals.
That's right.
I have connected with. And if it's something you're curious about, I'm happy to share information or just listen. Thank you for sharing this space with me for a moment. Much love to you all. That was like, wow. So, how did you get there?
Oh, well, I think, this was one of those moments where I was right at the 6 month mark of not of having chosen to go, like, forego drinking entirely, which is
Hard to
maybe
do in your industry.
it is a little bit. I mean, there's a lot of accent, and like a lot of our professional functions, if it's not at the heart of them, it certainly is part of them. And one of the things that I found was that in revisiting, because I was feeling, to be completely candid, I was feeling some grief about not being able to do something on a personal level that I felt like had been such an inspiring and powerful part of my career path. I really do love wine. It's and not like just drinking it. I mean, I love the wine business. I love the history of it. I mean, it's so tied up in the story of human culture, and there's so much richness there. The further you dig in, the more there is to know. And so I was having some grief around it. I was like, well, maybe I can do this. And in that moment, what I realized was that it just absolutely made me feel terrible. I think that I had become maybe accustomed to feeling a little bit like I don't I think maybe I was very used to not feeling amazing, because even in small quantities, consuming alcohol all the time is a depressant, right? And
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
I was so habituated to, that being a part of just how I felt that I didn't even notice it from the inside anymore. So, if I like just going back a little bit, one of the reasons that I posted this was because I think that visibility is really important. Like we learn so
Mhm.
much from each other when we allow ourselves to get vulnerable.
Yeah, absolutely.
The reason that I have decided to kind of make a leap and see if exploring staying in my professional space but being sober in my personal life was possible was because I had a colleague in my industry, this woman who is a wine rep, had been interviewed by the Metro Times last fall about a sobriety group that was specifically for people in the industry. And it's called Ben's Friends. And it was started, it's a fairly, like, I would say it's kind of a newcomer to the sobriety meeting landscape. And I was like, maybe this is for me. I mean, like, maybe I should have an open mind and check it out and see what it's like for people who have these really high stress and kind of frankly like socially alienating jobs. You work when everyone else is playing, which is a little complicated, and it was really hard. Going to those meetings, the first couple of them made me realize I how much I needed that community and how much I actually needed to give myself the space to explore sobriety after a year and a half of navigating the pandemic.
Monica, you mentioned grief around not having that same connection. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, well, so I'll kind of throw it back at you a little bit and say, like, if there's something that you've done in your life that you see as like engaging and you've taught yourself to believe is a reward,
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
and then you have to completely reconsider your relationship with it. It could be something like an injury that takes you out of like an athletic practice that makes you feel inspired, or a life change that takes you away from an artistic pursuit that you enjoy, or the pandemic that takes you away from hanging out with your friends.
Mm-hmm.
But something that is a like a well that you go to over and over again to find like connection, inspiration, etc. I like grief is the best word I can describe that. There's like this sense of longing that you have for things that you have gone to for comfort.
Yeah, no, that absolutely makes sense. I've worked a little bit in restaurants, not a lot, definitely not to your level at all. But I have worked in restaurants and in the industry a little bit, and I have worked with people who work in restaurants and talk about wine and do all the things, but are now themselves sober and have been for however many years that they've been sober. And I'm always fascinated by how that continues to work. That, they work in this industry, they talk about this basically temptation, for lack of a better word. Can you talk to that a little bit about how becoming sober has affected your work, and if it has kept you from continuing to improve in your work at all?
Oh wow, that's a great question. Thank you.
Of course.
That was a big fear that I had, was that it would be, I was like, oh man, what if I don't like what I do anymore? What if I find it really alienating? And honestly, the exact opposite has happened.
Oh, good.
To be fair, I mean, what we do, what we always should do, best practice, and what I've always done professionally is you swish and spit, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
I've tasted probably 500 wines since the beginning of February this year, which is like, pretty normal in the role that I have. You never consume anything when you're working. I mean, at least that's kind of the like best etiquette. I immediately sought to be able to continue to do that and never see it as sort of a like, I'm grateful that I never trespassed into drinking during my professional time, because it allowed me to maintain a healthy relationship with it, where I already knew to have good boundaries around that in my workspace. Tasting wasn't a temptation. It didn't make me want to drink. That was never like something that led to drinking in the first place for me. And honestly, I find my work, because I'm so much more balanced right now, I actually like what I do more, which was unexpected and is really kind of a gift.
That's fantastic.
In your role as a sommelier, do you, I guess not in your role, after your role is over, you've worked in the evening, you've helped a lot of guests, you've picked out some wines. In that industry, is there a lot of like daily drinking that's going on? And you mentioned that alcohol was a depressant. How was that affecting your life?
Oh, okay. I'll take that one step at a time, Jennifer.
I
That was a
tend
lot
to
of
do that.
questions. To answer your first question, I think this is your first question. Consuming alcohol on a daily basis is more than normal in the industry that I work in. You have a lot of access. I mean, and it's part of
The culture.
part of the culture.
Yeah, it makes sense.
And in a way that you don't even, it's very easy to not even think about the idea of like 1, 2, 3 glasses of wine a day as just completely normal, kind of part of part of just your dietary habits. That is, I mean, it's something to consider. And one of the things that I'll throw out there, and this is true for not just people in my line of work, but people in the industry in general, is it's like a common practice, if you've ever worked in a restaurant, that the restaurant gives you a shift drink. Everybody gets a drink after work. It's sort of a normal integrated part of the industry's work culture, for better or worse. And so one of the things that I did, and I just kind of, I want to like dovetail this in right now to say, I was able to acknowledge really fast when I decided to not drink anymore, that taking a page from AA, which is something that I never felt like a strong affinity for, so I didn't participate in, but I have a lot of friends who do. They always said one of the most important things is to have a sufficient substitute. What I did was I started creating a high quality non-alcoholic beverage program to run in tandem in the bar that I run, providing things like adaptogenic drinks, CBD offerings, like distilled but alcohol-free spirits that are based on plants. Here's the sort of like funny unintended consequences. So today is 7 months for me since I started this journey. As a consequence,
Congrats.
thanks, is I find that my staff now, I watch them going and grabbing themselves a CBD drink instead of a glass of wine at the end of their shift. And I'm starting to see this shift in the overall work environment, because it's becoming less and less a standard practice for us. And I did not expect that at all. And it's really cool.
That is really cool. I'd love to hear a little bit about these drinks, the adaptogens and the CBD. And you said there were some distilled, I forgot what you said.
Like plant spirits.
Yeah. One of the ones that we brought into the bar recently that I've been really enjoying, there's this line of, they're like, I guess you could call them a hydrosol. They're a water-based distillation from organic spices, flowers, plants, etc. The ones that I brought in are called Seedlip, and they're great. We do simple stuff with them, like muddled fresh citrus, sparkling water, and make like kind of a high quality mocktail for adults where it's low sugar, but it feels like a treat. It's complex, which is what people who drink wine like, is, it's kind of what draws you to wine. It's not just the alcohol, it's the fact that there's a lot going on there. And so that was the kind of like the mandate I gave myself, was to say, how do we take the things that people come here for and find a way to satisfy that without it being alcohol. The thing that I like about this is that I'm also seeing a lot of people show up and have a lot of gratitude for saying like, oh, I came out with my friends tonight. I didn't actually really want to drink. I'm so glad that you have something else for me. Whether it's because they're driving or they have a work meeting, or because they just don't feel the need to do that on any given day. Whatever their reasons, it's been really well received. There's just this undercurrent of desire to, and I think it is the pandemic that has led a lot of people there, because we always joke that in the industry, we always joke that alcohol sales are recession proof. We didn't realize they'd be pandemic proof too. So we didn't see any downturn in sales during the pandemic. We started a delivery service. People were having me drop wine on their front porch all over the Metro Detroit area, so I think that people are reconsidering their relationship with it a bit, as you mentioned earlier, saying like, hey, is this really working for me, and to what degree? It's not about necessarily abstention, but people are saying like, how do I want to approach alcohol in my life?
When you decided to do your career and do it from the sober aspect, how quickly did you see results, and like, what did it feel like?
Oh, well, initially it was a little hard, to be honest.
I'm sure.
I was like, well, what do I'm so used to sitting down and having a glass of wine or two at the end of my day, or it's like there was a lot of shifts that I had to make. But the thing that was sort of more interesting for me was I didn't realize what those habits were allowing me to avoid in my life.
Ooh, that's big.
Yeah. Without really taking a deep dive into it, unless, yeah, I mean, if you all want to go there, we can go there. But just saying
Sure.
that
If you would like to go there, please feel free. Don't feel obligated.
it freed up my headspace for really addressing some stuff that maybe I needed to in my life, and saying like, do I really feel well? Do I like how I'm living? I feel like daily consumption of alcohol, even if it wasn't a lot, was enough that I was able to put on hold some things that I really could have been addressing in terms of my own
Got it.
wellness, in terms of my own happiness. And I started finding the longer I went without it, that for me personally, and I'm not saying this is true for anyone else, and I certainly am not prescribing abstention as the ticket for everyone, because I think everyone's relationship with it is going to be unique to them. But for me, at this point in my life, what I found was that to be more well rested, to be more intentional, to have the ability to show up with a really, really clear head, like almost every day, it was really powerful. And it continues to be really powerful for me in terms of figuring out what I want in my life and doing it in a way that is I feel more present. And honestly, I feel a lot more joy on a daily basis.
Yeah, one thing that pops into my head when I think about somebody who is in the industry, who then decides, okay, I'm going to be sober, or I'm going to be sober curious, or however you want to term it. The first thing that pops into my head is, does that put your job in jeopardy? And maybe the other part of that is, how did your employer respond to you deciding to stop drinking?
Oh man, good question. And the answer is yes, I was worried. Oh my goodness. Yeah, I was totally worried. I kept it to myself for probably at least 3 months.
Oh, wow.
I
That's a
mean,
long time.
I just sort of kept it under wraps at work. And I didn't tell the owner of the business until New Year's. We had a New Year's party, and she offered me a glass of champagne, and I said, "Oh, I'm just gonna have a ginger beer." And she was like, "What? Really?" And I said, "Actually, yeah, I decided to take some really serious time off from drinking." And I was really afraid in that moment that it would be seen as unprofessional, or it looked, and I realized that that was all in my head, because immediately her response was, "Oh, that takes self-discipline. I'm really impressed." At all. And yeah, it actually does take self-discipline.
It's so interesting because it's like the opposite of another type of job. The other job, you don't want to be drinking at the Christmas party.
Right. It's true.
That's
That was
very
my
funny.
same thought, Jennifer.
Yeah, it's very funny. I think it's amazing that you have a female boss. I don't think that should be so amazing, but it's been my experience that there aren't a whole lot of women in the industry. You're a woman in the industry. What's your experience been?
Oh, wow. That's a big topic. It's hard. I mean, full stop. It's hard. I was running like starting beverage programs as a consultant before I got this job that I currently have. And I felt like I was just living with my head pressed against the glass ceiling, no matter which way I went, always working for men in the industry. You know, there was not really a sense of the sort of like collaboration and desire to like empower each other that I was really looking for in a workplace. So one night I had opened up I had helped open this Italian restaurant. It was a really nice Italian restaurant in Southeast Michigan. And I was running their cellar program and doing their front of house operations. And we were just, I was in a super affluent area. It was like a suit and pearls and heels kind of job. I would drive home every night just completely shattered because it was so demoralizing to work there. And I was a contractor, so I wasn't required to be there, but like I didn't have a contract, like I didn't have to stay. But one night I called my mother, who also was a scientist and went into her field in the 70s. So she knew all about the experience of what it is to be a woman in a man's profession. Let me restate that. A woman in a profession that is not built for women or supportive of women.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's a lot of them.
So, yeah, it sure is. And I was crying to my mom as I was driving home down the highway, down 94 in the dark. And I was saying, oh my God, this is so exhausting. I just don't feel like I can make the kind of progress I need. And she said, well, make a short list of, all of the women you want to work for in the industry in your, like in that are within driving distance of where you live. And there was one name.
Oh, wow.
Maybe two, but there was really one. There was one business that did like that in my professional space that was doing something slightly different, that was woman owned, not just run by women, but owned by women. And so I woke up the next morning and I cold called them and I said, hey, I really want you to hire me. Will you please give me a chance? And I took a major step down, just took whatever job they were willing to give me. And it was absolutely the smartest thing I have done professionally, was to step into the space of working with women as a woman.
How is it different? I mean, the industry is the same. How is it different working for a woman than a man?
It's, it's hard to say because the sample size isn't great.
Right.
So I can only speak to this particular experience versus all of my other experiences. So I can only, I want to say that because I want to be clear. I can only talk about
Sure.
this. I can't say this is like authoritative, right? Women work differently together. I mean, we had to figure out how to navigate keeping a small business open during the pandemic. And I mean, like, I'm not saying that working for women is perfect or it's the solution, but we collaborate and communicate differently together. And the decision making was always taking a look at not just like looking at the human beings in the business as the top priority was never something that we had to discuss as being of value. First and foremost saying we have to take care of the staff. The staff are the business. Without them, we're nothing. So how do we protect our staff? And that's how we navigated the first 18 months of going. I mean, I'm just absolutely allergic to the word pivot at this point, as you probably are too. But let's say we ran, I would say, half a dozen distinct different businesses in 18 months. And we always kept at the center of that, putting the safety of our staff first. And it wasn't perfect. And we didn't always hit the mark, but knowing that we shared those values made it possible. It's very different. It's less authoritarian and more collaborative.
So you didn't find the stereotypes of women being catty or bitchy to each other or tearing each other apart. You didn't find that in the business world.
Oh, it's there.
Okay, keeping it real.
Oh, every day. But but it's there because we're in a culture that encourages us to act that way. And we have to unlearn some pretty harmful things to get past that, but we can.
Mm.
And when we do, it's pretty cool.
So given your experience, the majority of it being in very male dominated spaces, and now some experience where there are women leading the charge. And, this is maybe not a fair question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Do you think that your experience becoming sober would have been different if you were still working in a male dominated space than in a female led space?
Oh boy, good question. I don't know. I
told you it was unfair.
No,
it is interesting though
right.
to think about. Yeah, it's interesting.
I don't know. I think if I were in a different business situation, I don't even know if I'd still be in the industry after the last year and a half. So many people have left, consequence of how hard the last couple of years have been. We've seen, we have such a massive labor shortage right now, and we certainly had some pretty rough moments even with our staff. As you know, it has been hard. It has been a complicated experience that is super psychologically wearing on everyone. And even when you do your absolute best, the way that the food service industry is configured is a little bit like there's not too many other businesses that say, we're going to just get our act together and then we're going to sit here and let people come at us in whatever time they want, and we're going to be responsive to their needs as they demand things of us. And that's just, and we have no, we don't have a lot of control. Right. And so that's been the thing that I think all restaurants have been looking at over the last couple of years, is saying like, okay, so how do we, because that is a really stressful thing to do to human beings, to just say, okay, show up and you're just going to have to do whatever comes at you with absolutely no sense of, like what you're going to have to deal with or how much for 8 hours, 10 hours, 14 hours, for how many days and weeks, et cetera. So finding a way to create a more humane relationship with work in the industry has been a big part of how those of us who have stayed and done the work have had to do to keep our staff healthy and safe. We've really had to reconsider the foundation of how we work, and it is so needed and so welcome, and is probably one of the only great things that has come out of this experience.
Yeah, I totally get that. It's really interesting in the service industry because the job is to serve others. And I think no time in history that I remember did the entitlement to that. At first, people in the service industry for 10 quick minutes were heroes. But then the entitlement started. Did you feel a lot of the entitlement?
Well, we really took the reins on that one.
That's great.
Also,
so a handful of hospitality environments, and to be fair, just to give you a little context, the business that I manage is unique because it is both a retail environment and a restaurant. And so we were able to stay open during periods of the pandemic when other places had to close. We just closed the restaurant portion and ran the the public facing retail business. So we were able to maintain our staff, which was not true for most places. They had to just fully shut down. So we were sort of ahead of the curve in terms of saying, we've been sort of here on the ground, thinking about how we do work, how we do it safely, and how we create a work environment where we put our staff as, as the priority, and then let that lead how we treat our clientele. And it's been not only net positive, but kind of amazing. Although, like I said before, has had some moments where it's been shamefully hard and we've missed the mark, in the learning process, because there's no model for running these kind of businesses in a way that has good standards for HR, I guess. To be completely honest, if you've ever worked in a restaurant, this is true.
Yeah.
HR and like putting boundaries around how a guest or a customer can actually treat a human being who works in the industry.
Boundaries is the word.
Yeah, some boundaries around that, because I do feel like in a certain, service industry, there to serve others, that gets taken to such a, the customer is always right. You do whatever you have to make them happy. And I have worked in that and believe that to some extent, but to what extent?
Right.
It's been a wild ride. It's been a wild ride.
But don't you think that it's been kind of eye-opening and good to reconsider our relationship with that?
Yes, I do.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I don't
I
think
think people are starting to wake up and think, oh, people in the service industry are actually getting verbally abused almost daily.
Oh,
And
daily.
I don't think, yeah, and I don't think people really gave that much thought before.
yeah. I mean, well, the staff certainly did, but they didn't have a lot of
Well,
agency to change
the
it.
staff, sure, yeah, yeah, because the staff goes through it. So yeah, the staff, absolutely.
Yeah, and it's, but I will say that the last couple of years has taught us to have good boundaries and to set expectations around them. At some point, maybe a year ago, and I'm paraphrasing here, I saw this thing pop up online, and somebody said essentially something to the effect of, we're no longer offering service, we're offering hospitality. Hospitality is an act of reciprocity that involves mutual respect between both parties.
So good. So good.
And you
Yeah, I
can't
like that.
offer hospitality if one person is being inhospitable in the situation, right? So saying like this is not a place for, and we really clearly state that. And I tell my staff this all of the time. And we've had to say it a lot because we're all learning how to respect our own needs in the workplace, and how to have good boundaries and have the support to enforce them and good ways to do that. It has been kind of eye-opening and incredible to see the quality of everyone's experience, including the guests, actually improve as a consequence of us saying, hey, this is our house and there's certain things like we would love to have you here, but there are certain things that we need from you in terms of being respectful of us, of the other patrons, of the timing, etc. You have to let us have a little bit more control so that you can have the best experience.
Well, Monica, do you find that having a new relationship to alcohol, in the fact that you're now sober, has allowed you to better navigate and maybe set those boundaries?
Absolutely.
And has that helped you as far as being able to help your staff with that too? And if so, how does that manifest itself basically when you're trying to help your staff with that?
I think about this one a lot. I mean, I because, trying to figure out what it looks like to do, to not be a top-down leader is one of the things that I really focus on. It's a lot harder to manage staff by saying, I support you, here are the expectations, not I'm telling you what to do and there's punishment if it doesn't happen. Right. And that's one of the differences between a lot of, like, I won't say exclusively like businesses run by men, because I can think of some that aren't, but like that's been sort of the typical sort of patriarchal model, is to say, hey, we're just going to tell you what to do, and if you step out of line, then you're gone. Do what we say, versus trying to figure out how to say, here's our shared goals. Do you consent to aligning to them as a staff? How do we increase buy-in, and how do we create a work environment where everyone feels like they have agency and wants to do the job because it is empowering, and not because they are afraid of not having a job. And so I think one of the things that sobriety has given me to this point is that it's given me the bandwidth to become more responsive and less reactive in everything that I do, which has given me a lot more capacity to apply myself to trying to support this change.
I like that. Responsive more than reactive.
Yeah.
100%. What do you do for yourself? Because you've had a lot of changes, COVID, sobriety. How do you take care of yourself?
one of my biggest self-care practices, I mean, is writing. I do a lot of writing on a daily basis. I find that that's really helpful for me. I go to the Zen temple here in Detroit for Zen meditation, which I love. If you talk to my younger self, they would have laughed and said, "You find a lot of peace in going and being told to shut up and sit quietly in a room for an hour." That sounds like punishment, but it's amazing. It's a wonderful community. I find a lot of richness in going there. After the sessions, there is tea with the monks and nuns, and it's incredible. I actually find a lot of support in going to a weekly meeting through that group I was mentioning before, Ben's Friends. An industry specific. It's not a recovery program. It's a bit more of a wellness focused and awareness focused program, but specifically about maintaining sobriety within the context of the hospitality industry. That's fantastic. And I don't know, making sure that I don't, I stay connected with human beings, really like leaning into making my relationships with others more rich, spending the time asking, like really taking the time to work on my relationships in my life and being more mindful about that and being intentional about it has been really powerful for me too.
Have you met with any resistance from your friend groups or social situations where people are getting together? Oh, we're going to have a wine night, or oh, we're going to do this, that, and we're going to meet for drinks, and you're not drinking.
I mean, no, luckily, no. Although, to be fair, I think that we've all been doing a lot less hanging out. So
Well, that's true. Yeah.
it's to make those changes, which in a way has been helpful to, I was like, well, this is a great time to do this because I have no social pressure. No, it's been really good. I find that, a lot of my friends, especially like the women in my life, as they get older, I'll show up and we'll make dinner and I'll be like, I'm making NA cocktails. And they're like, oh, cool. I love this. I'm not going to drink either. And so I'm seeing more people actually finding like some joy in doing something different with me and exploring that. So I've been very lucky. I'm just going to say I've been really, really lucky in that it's been more celebrated than anything else.
Good. I'm glad you haven't met with the resistance that maybe a few years ago would have been more prevalent.
Oh, I think you're right. And tell me what you think, but this has been my experience, is that one of the things that has come out of the last couple of years, at least for some of us, and definitely for me, is that I feel like the people in my life that I'm close to and in my professional environment, one of the things that we've learned how to do that I don't think any of us were very good at before, to be completely honest, is asking for consent, because it was about safety for a while. And so learning how to do consent check-ins around safety and comfort has become more of a standard practice. I think it kind of set the stage for being better at saying, hey, you're doing this for your own wellness. I like that. I can support you. Versus before saying, oh, what? You're being a party pooper, blah, blah. It's like, I think that our culture has changed a little bit.
Yes. Yeah, I think you're right. I agree with you on that. That it's more of, hey, you're doing this for you. That's awesome. You do you. As long as the person doing it isn't sort of lording it over people of, well, I gave up this, so you should too, kind of thing.
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, oh my goodness. Yeah, absolutely that. It's like sharing your experience, but never telling others what to do is really important.
I think the thing that I've seen around that, I've seen a couple things I think are similar to what you're talking about, Monica. In work, I see where people used to need like a day off work for mental health, or, they were calling in, and then there was a lot of like, is that person calling in because they're really sick, or are they faking it? And people were questioning motives. And I think we have moved away from questioning motives because we don't know. Someone could have COVID or they do need a mental health day. And I think we've opened up to that a little bit more. But then the other thing I'm seeing, and maybe it's just in the social circles that I am in, but I'm seeing this real desire emerging, especially for women, to step into their authenticity and to really say, like, this is who I am and this is what I'm doing right now. And I'd like to still hang with you, but this is the way it's going to be, without listing all the I'm sorries and all of the excuses and all of the apologies and over explaining oneself. Just saying, I'm coming to the party. I'd love to hang out with you. I'm going to make my own mocktail and I'm going to have a good time. I hope you have a good time too. It just seems like that has changed.
Oh, I agree. And I love it. I am here for that energy. It feels so good to me to, I don't know, to gas the people in your life up for the choices that they're making. I think that like one of the things that is sort of the enemy of sobriety is shame.
Yes.
Because shame keeps you in a space of hiding your choices, hiding your truth from yourself.
Yes.
And the closer we can get to our truth, oh, this is so important to me, is the idea of really getting kind of like fearlessly authentic. And that came more from, so like in the midst of the pandemic, or actually like right before it, I think I mentioned, I also ended a 12-year marriage right at the beginning of the pandemic, like before, like 3 weeks before we all went into.
You went through it.
Oh my goodness.
I mean, I got divorced on Zoom at work.
Oh.
Wow.
It was rough. It was a test, and then another test and a test on top of that. But the thing that really, like, as I was leaving that experience of being someone's wife, and which was not, I mean, it's complicated, but it wasn't, I'm not saying it was an all bad thing, but the thing that I realized was that in that time I had changed. And one of the things that I couldn't get out of my head, that was the metronome driving me stepping into the space of greater authenticity in my life, and eventually led me into a place of sobriety as well. It's informed by the same thing, was that I couldn't unhear this phrase, I will not make myself smaller for your comfort any longer.
Yes. Yes. We have heard that a few times now from women on this podcast.
Amen.
We must take up our space.
Yes.
Absolutely. It is.
Yes.
And like after this past week, it is even more essential than it has ever been for us to.
Yes.
We can all take up all of the space that we need. It's not
all of it.
Shoulder to shoulder, we can be magnificent. We do not have to do anything that diminishes us for any reason. It like, we're taught as women, I think, to sublimate our needs a lot.
Yes.
And for what, like
really, for what? That is the
exactly.
question now, isn't it? Really, for what? To become someone that we're not.
Right. And for whose benefit? Not ours, and not
even for the person we're with either.
Yeah, not at all.
Like,
it's for society's benefit.
Our partners, our children, our loved ones and friends do not benefit from us being a distorted, less than well or happy version of ourselves. That is not like, it's so absolutely unnecessary.
Yeah, that is truth. Absolute truth right there.
And I feel like there are so many people, not just women, but people who are waking up to this fact. And that is why we are seeing this huge backlash. That's why we're seeing all these, hate to say it, no, I don't hate to say it, white men in power trying to push this shackle down on us, because they know we are growing in power and getting bigger and not shrinking anymore. They know it.
They
feel
are afraid of our power, because our power is enormous. And when it is used and utilized and for its greatest good, we move mountains. We've done it before. We have to continue doing it.
Amen to that. I mean, all I can say to the powers that be is come at me, bro. Like
Right?
Come at me, bro. Well, one of the reasons that why Raquel and I wanted you to be on the podcast is because of your Instagram. And we talked about this a little bit earlier. There's so many out there that are filters and images of what maybe we see in magazines or what is being shoved down our throat. But yours is so authentic and real. And at least the way I vision you, showing yourself to the world through art and wine and your career, but also your thoughts and even today, your relationship with your father. I just think it's amazing that you show so much authenticity freely to people.
Thank you. I mean, I think I do it a little bit because I can't help it, but also because it's healing for me to be, again, like circling back to that idea of shame. And also it's partially because it just really, like, I just hate what it does to us to like sanitize our experience. It's just so uncool. Like it's just not, it is not joyful and it is not fun to only present the face that you, for what reason, believe the world wants to see. There's nothing good there. It's not juicy. It's not
even real.
Yeah. And then like what people approve of this false version of you, and you're like, what, getting a little dopamine hit because somebody, clapped for like something that was kind of false advertising to begin with. Man, that doesn't speak to me anymore at all.
Well, and we've seen there's strength and vulnerability. There's nothing shameful about being vulnerable.
Well, because people can't manipulate you very easily if you're already like, I take ownership of all of my stuff. So what are you gonna do? Like make me feel bad?
Exactly. Like, this is who I am.
Yeah, I mean, there's always room to be earnest and to take responsibility for your actions. Like that doesn't, I feel more capable of doing that the more like to the bone, like shamelessly honest I get about my positive truth, the more capable I feel of being strong in taking criticism and feedback that I would have found like threatening to my ego before.
Yeah.
And instead I'm like, oh yeah, I did do that. I messed up. Like, oh, tell me your needs. Like, how can we talk about this? I'll tell you if I can meet you there or not. It gets so much easier for me. The less shame I feel about just who I am, the more strength I feel in being able to actually take responsibility for the parts of me that are not the best for others or for myself.
Right. Well, and going back to what you said before you became sober, you realized that it was keeping you from parts of yourself. And now that fog is lifted, that veil is sort of taken away. It's easier for you to access all of who you are.
I don't think that it's necessary to, like, I'm going to say, I'm not going to prescribe sobriety specifically for everyone as the way to get there. It was just what I needed because I had already done a lot of the other work. It was like, I was already a regular meditator. I was already like asking myself hard questions. I had made some huge life changes and had faced a lot of fears, but I was in this place where I was kind of, retreating from discomfort by rewarding myself with alcohol because that's what I do. That's not,
I do it with cake. Cake is mine. I reward myself with cake. You laugh, but it's true.
Oh.
We laugh because we've been there. And maybe we are there.
Oh,
I wonder if you were to look at young Monica, or let's say someone female in the industry trying to work their way through the system now, what kind of advice would you give?
Good question. If I get really honest for myself, I have to say this before I answer, is I've always wanted to do this work, not necessarily wine, but like I've been an obsessive cook, and since I was a little kid, since I was a tiny little kid, I wish Master Chef Junior had been a thing when I was a kid. That was for me. I was circling the sections in the Williams Sonoma catalog when I was 5, saying, "Mom, can we get these copper pots?" And she's like, "What are you talking about, child?" So for me, this has always been the place I wanted, in spite of the problems, and there have been many. If I were to give any advice, I mean, I think that don't stay in an uncomfortable place simply because it feels like you're being told that it's the place where the rubber meets the road in terms of professional growth, and so you have to suck it up and take the hits. I feel like we're often told to ignore and I think that this is actually a huge source of where I learned how to disorient my own healthy signals of what is safe and what is comfortable, was working in the industry, and being told that my needs didn't matter or my safety didn't matter. That the more times I heard that and had to kind of say, okay, well, oh well, my self-knowledge doesn't count here, I got further and further from it myself. You don't just leave that at work. When you compromise on that kind of on respecting your own needs, it spills out into other parts of your life, and it kind of disorients your expectations for what your life should look like on a bigger level. At least that's true for me. That's a big question that we kind of all have in front of us going forward in every profession right now, is to say, how do we do work that in a way, how do we do the work that we do in a way that is sustainable and mutual and healthy?
Where do you see yourself going with your career?
Ooh,
I've been asking myself that a lot lately.
I think we all have.
We all have.
It is the Great Recession. No, regret. What is
the Great
it called?
Resignation.
The Great, yeah. Well, it might be the Great
Right
Recession, but the Great Resignation, isn't it? Oh, is upon us.
It's the Great Reconsideration is upon us. Yeah, that is an incredibly good question and a hard one to answer, because the thing that I've learned how to love that I would never have known on a really deep level was true for me is that solving the problems of how do we work, and how do we make ethical choices around how we interact with one another within the context of organizations has become more interesting to me than the other parts of, it's this sort of bigger question has become more interesting to me than almost anything else. I'm sort of going into uncharted territory because we need to ask those questions. I would love to be doing it professionally. Because we don't have a rubric for that, it's sort of uncharted territory.
Is there anything that we haven't brought up that you feel still needs to be said, or that you are just dying to get out there that you want people to hear?
I don't know. This has been a really rich experience to come and talk to you two. This is so, it's fun, and it's fun to be heartfelt and to talk about these topics. So that's really exciting to me. The only thing that I can say is that I don't want to preach sobriety necessarily, but I do want to preach, I want to speak a little bit to just saying authenticity is really kind of the name of the game, and the things that get in the way of us being able to align with the truth of what we need to do for our own wellness, to do for one, and that prevent us from showing up for one another. That becomes that's a question of our health and what is going to work for us, and what is where wellness lies. For me, that was really the issue, is more that alcohol was creating more alienation than connection. I saw that as a wake-up call, that it was time to make a big change in my life. I have nothing but gratitude for everything that's come after that.
That's amazing. I totally agree that connection is where it's at. I don't have any other way to say it. Connection is what we all need.
A huge reason why Jennifer and I do this podcast is to foster connection and to help other people see that not only is connection possible, but it's important. It's key. It's a vital part of what life is supposed to be about.
I couldn't agree more.
Well, Monica, thank you so much for being part of this connection and sharing your story and being so open and candid and thoughtful in this conversation.
It's been a treat for me to just hang out with you two. We all find greater wellness together. And that is, I think, our greatest resource as women is our strength and
Yes.
our health and our community. So, cheers to that.
Thanks everyone for listening today. We will be back with more Madness Cafe next week. You can find us on Instagram at Madness Cafe Podcast or email us at madnesscafepodcast@gmail.com. Bye.